This story is titled, My Daughter's Intentional Lies in Court Led to My Prison Cell. After 6 months of freedom, I'm starting to execute my revenge plan. Hey Reddit, I need to write this down. I simply can't hold it in anymore. This anger is eating me alive. I'm 42 years old with a daughter named Rachel. She has been nothing but trouble for years now. I don't know if it's our parenting or if she's just wired differently, but it feels like she was born to test my patience. She's selfish, ungrateful, and never takes responsibility for anything she does. It wasn't always like this. When Rachel was little, she was sweet. A bit stubborn, sure, but I thought it was just normal kid stuff. Then junior high hit, and everything changed completely. She started acting like the world owed her something, like she was better than everyone else. She would throw tantrums if she didn't get her way, slamming doors, screaming at us, you name it, she did it. My wife Catherine kept saying it was just a phase, that she'd grow out of it. She didn't. By the time Rachel hit her teenage years, it was like living in hell. She lied about everything, where she was, who she was with, what she was doing. If her lips were moving, she was probably lying. She skipped school so much that the principal called us in for a meeting. I told her she needed to shape up, and she just rolled her eyes and said, "Whatever, Dad," like I was nothing to her. At 16, Rachel just gave up completely. One day she came home with an announcement. "School's stupid. I don't need it." Just like that, she dropped out of high school like it was nothing. Catherine and I begged her to reconsider. We tried everything we could, but she wouldn't listen to reason. She just packed her things and walked right out the door. She didn't even look back, not a single glance. She ran off with some deadbeat boyfriend. The guy was a complete waste of space, no job, no future, nothing. I don't even remember his name anymore, which is probably better that way. 3 whole years of silence followed after that. No calls, no texts, nothing at all. Complete radio silence. Catherine was devastated. She cried herself to sleep most nights, always wondering if Rachel was okay, if she'd ever come back home. Me? I felt different. I was angry, but I also felt relieved. The house was finally quiet. No more drama, no more fighting. I thought maybe this was for the best, that life could finally be peaceful. Then, one night, everything changed. It was pouring rain outside, like some dramatic movie scene. There she was, standing on our doorstep, soaked to the bone, holding a trash bag full of clothes. "I have nowhere else to go," she said, just like that. After 3 years of nothing. My first instinct was clear. I wanted to slam the door in her face. But Catherine rushed past me and pulled Rachel inside before I could react. She hugged her like she'd just returned from war, even though Rachel hadn't bothered to call once in those 3 years. Not once. "She's our daughter," Catherine kept saying. "We can't just leave her out there." I knew better. I knew it was a mistake, but I let her stay anyway. Boy, was I right about that mistake. At first, I tried to be optimistic. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she'd changed. Maybe she'd learned something during those 3 years away. I was completely wrong. Within days, she was back to her old habits. She didn't look for work. She didn't help around the house. She did absolutely nothing except sit on the couch all day, scrolling through her phone endlessly like some zombie. I would ask her to do simple things. Take out the trash, do the dishes, basic stuff anyone can do. Her response was always the same. Roll her eyes like a teenager and ask, "Why can't you do it?" She always claimed she was tired. Tired from what? Sitting on her ass all day doing nothing? Then there were the nights. She would leave after dinner saying she was going for a walk and be gone for hours, sometimes past midnight. When I'd ask where she'd been, she'd just shrug and say, "Nowhere," like I wasn't supposed to care, like I wasn't her father. She'd come back with this smile, like everything was perfect, like she didn't have a care in the world. She'd flop on the couch and go back to scrolling through her phone, like clockwork, every single time. I tried talking to Catherine about it, but she kept making excuses. "She's been through a lot," she'd say. "She just needs time to adjust." Adjust to what exactly? Being queen of the house while we bend over backwards to accommodate everything? One night, I couldn't take it anymore. Rachel had stayed out until 1 a.m., and when she finally came home, I had to confront her. "Where the hell have you been?" I demanded. She just laughed. She actually laughed at me. "Why do you care?" That's all she said, like I was some stranger off the street instead of the father who raised her. I told her she needed to start pulling her weight or find somewhere else to live. Her response still kills me to this day. "You're supposed to take care of me," she said. "That's what parents do." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything she'd done, after dropping out, after running away, after 3 years of silence, she still thought we owed her something. That's when I snapped. I gave her an ultimatum. 24 hours to pack up, 24 hours to get out. Catherine tried to argue, but I shut it down immediately. She's an adult, I said. She made her choices. It's time to deal with the consequences. At first, Rachel thought I was joking. She just laughed it off with a casual, "Yeah, okay, Dad," like it was all some big joke. Then she saw I was serious. Her whole attitude changed instantly. She started screaming, "You're a terrible father, and you don't love me?" before storming off to her room. She slammed the door so hard the whole house shook. Catherine gave me the silent treatment for the rest of the day. I didn't even care anymore. We'd been through this before. It was nothing new. Everything happened before the deadline, before her 24 hours were even up. I was in the living room, sitting on the couch, scrolling through the news, trying to decompress after another argument with Catherine about her enabling Rachel. My patience was already worn thin. I was just waiting for tomorrow, when Rachel would finally be gone and I could have my home back. But life had other plans. There was a loud knock at the door, 3 quick, sharp bangs. This wasn't friendly knocking. My heart started racing as I got up to answer, my stomach in knots. 3 police officers were standing there, all looking dead serious. "Sir, we have a warrant to search your property," one of them said. My mind went blank. "What? Why?" "Anonymous tip," they explained. "About illegal drugs being stored in this house. Report filed under your name." My name, my house. I felt the ground disappearing beneath me. I wanted to argue. I wanted to slam the door. But I knew it wouldn't help. I stepped aside and let them in, dread settling over me like a heavy blanket. The officers spread out. One stayed in the living room while the other searched the house. Catherine was frozen in the hallway, her face white as a ghost. Rachel was a different story. She sat on the couch, completely unfazed, and had the nerve to smirk as the officers went upstairs to check the bedrooms. I didn't have proof, but I knew this was her doing. Who else could it be? She'd been sneaking around, staying out late, hanging with who knows who. She was the only one with anything to gain from this chaos. The officers searched her room first. I stood in the hallway watching as they tore through everything, flipped through drawers, pulled sheets off the bed, emptied her backpack. They found nothing, not a single thing. I felt a tiny bit of hope that maybe this was all a misunderstanding, that maybe Rachel hadn't done anything after all. Then they moved to my room. I didn't think they'd find anything. Why would they? I wasn't involved in anything illegal. I don't have drugs, never had drugs. But then an officer pulled back my mattress. "Here," he said, holding up a bag. I recognized it immediately. Heroin. As the officer held up the first bag, I glanced at Rachel, hoping to see shock or confusion or anything human on her face. Instead, she smirked. Her lips curled up, sending a chill down my spine. She didn't flinch, didn't deny anything. She just sat there like it was all a game. My blood was boiling in my veins as I realized she wasn't just indifferent. She was proud. Proud of what she'd done. I couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in on me. "That's not mine," I said, my voice shaking. The officers weren't listening. They kept searching and found several more bags, all under my bed, scattered across the room like someone had planted them there. "Sir, you're under arrest!" The words hit me like a sledgehammer. "For possession of a controlled substance." They pulled out handcuffs. Catherine burst into tears. Rachel just watched like it was some movie, some entertainment show. When they cuffed me, I looked back at her one last time, hoping to see guilt, hoping to see remorse, something, anything. Instead, she smiled. She actually smiled. The next few hours blurred together. They took me to the station, fingerprinted me, and took my mugshot. I kept saying over and over, "The drugs aren't mine," and someone set me up. But no one cared. The evidence was in my house, under my bed. That was enough for them. They denied me bail, saying the amount of heroin suggested distribution involvement. My lawyer tried to fight it, but it didn't matter. I was stuck. Stuck in jail, waiting for the investigation to play out. The weeks dragged by. They tested the drugs for fingerprints, checked for DNA, looked for anything that could link them to me. They found nothing. My fingerprints weren't on the bags. There was no evidence connecting me to the drugs. But it still didn't help. The house was in my name, so the drugs were my responsibility unless I could prove otherwise. My lawyer argued that someone must have planted them, but without solid evidence, it was just my word against theirs. I knew it was Rachel. I don't know how she did it. Maybe she had been storing drugs in my room without me noticing, or maybe she planted them there as a way to get back at me for kicking her out. Either way, she was the only one who could have done it. I spent 5 agonizing months in jail. Not because the case was complicated, not because the evidence wasn't clear, but simply because the court schedule was backlogged. Justice had to wait its turn, even when someone's life was being torn apart. The delay felt eternal. Every day in that cell was torture. Another day sitting alone with my thoughts, replaying everything over and over. The betrayal, the humiliation, the helplessness. It all circled in my head like a broken record. My body was locked up, but my mind never stopped pacing. I couldn't stop thinking about it, how my own daughter did this to me. I wondered if she was laughing about it, going about her life like nothing happened, while I was stuck here in a place I didn't belong. Catherine visited a few times during those months. Her presence felt like a weight on my chest. She wasn't there for support or reassurance, not really. Every visit felt like an interrogation. She was probing, fishing for answers I couldn't give her. I needed her to believe in me, to fight for me. Instead, she seemed confused, unsure if she could trust me. The man she'd been married to for 20 years. Why would Rachel do something like this? She asked during one visit, her voice hesitant. She couldn't even say the words without doubting them. I clenched my fists so tight my knuckles turned white. You know why? I said, trying to keep my voice calm but failing miserably. You've seen what she's like. You've seen her lie, manipulate, twist things to get what she wants. This isn't new. Catherine shook her head, her face pale and drawn. But planting drugs? Getting you arrested? That's not just lying. I don't know. It's evil. Her voice cracked as she looked down at her hands, wringing them like they held the answers. She's been on this path for years, I said bitterly. You just didn't want to see it. You kept making excuses. She's been through a lot, every time she crossed a line. You let her get away with it. And now this is where we are. My words hit her like a slap. I didn't care anymore. I was too angry, too tired, too broken to soften the truth for her. If she had stood by me, believed in me from the start, maybe I could have handled this better. Instead, she kept second-guessing, making me feel like I was the one on trial. Maybe you just didn't know, she said during another visit, her voice trembling. Maybe there's more to this. I stared at her, stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Do you even hear yourself? I snapped at her. You're my wife. You've known me for 2 decades. Do you really think I'd get involved in drugs? Risk everything? For what? Some heroin under the bed? She didn't answer. She just sat there, looking at the floor like a scolded child. Her silence spoke volumes. She didn't believe me, not completely. She might have wanted to, but deep down, she had doubts. That doubt cut deeper than anything else. The worst part hit me like a truck. I knew Rachel had planned this. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't an impulse decision. This was calculated. She took time to hide drugs in my room. She knew it would shift the blame to me. She reported me anonymously. She made sure the police had a reason to show up with a warrant. She did everything possible to frame me perfectly, and it worked exactly as she planned. Yet my own wife couldn't see it. My parents, who visited once, couldn't see it. Even some so-called friends started to distance themselves, whispering behind my back. The evidence might not have pointed to me directly, but the stigma of a drug arrest made people doubt. And doubt is a powerful thing. It sticks to you like a stain you can't wash off no matter what. While the court delayed my hearing again and again, I had nothing to do but sit in my cell and stew in my anger. I thought about all the times Rachel lied to my face, all the times I gave her chances she never deserved. I thought about that smirk when the police took me away, like she knew exactly what she did. I thought about Catherine's tears, not because I was in jail, but because she didn't know if she could trust me anymore after 20 years of marriage. By the time I finally got my day in court, I wasn't the same person who walked into jail 5 months ago. I was harder now, angrier, less willing to forgive. The system had failed me. My family had failed me. All because of the selfish actions of one person, my own daughter. When the evidence finally came to light, Rachel's texts surfaced. Witnesses came forward who had seen her sneaking around. There were no fingerprints or DNA tying me to the drugs. The world suddenly remembered I existed. The charges against me were dropped, but the damage was already done. 5 months of my life were gone. 5 months, I was treated like a criminal. 5 months I was doubted by people who claimed to love me. 5 months I was left to rot in a cell while they questioned whether I was the kind of man who would hide heroin under his bed. My name was cleared legally, but socially and emotionally, I knew I would never be the same. I wasn't just angry at Rachel anymore. I was angry at everyone who doubted me, everyone who left me there while they questioned my character. In that anger, a seed of revenge started growing. I didn't just want Rachel to face consequences. I wanted her to know what it felt like to lose everything. I wanted the world to look at her the way it had looked at me. I wanted her to pay, really pay, for what she did. The first thing I did after getting home was to sit in the living room in silence. Catherine stood there awkwardly by the doorway, like she didn't know what to say. Maybe she thought I'd be thrilled to be back home. Or maybe she expected me to forgive everything and just move on. But I couldn't even look at her without feeling a mix of betrayal and anger. Why didn't you believe me? I finally broke the silence. My voice cracked a little, which pissed me off even more. I wanted to sound strong, not broken. Catherine didn't answer right away. She just stood there, wringing her hands. "It was hard, okay?" she finally said. "The drugs were found in your room. What was I supposed to think?" "You were supposed to know me!" I snapped at her. "You've known me for 20 years. You've seen what Rachel's like. But the second something bad happens, you turn on me." My voice was rising now, but I didn't even care. "You know I didn't do it. Deep down you knew. But instead of standing by me, you let me rot in jail while you played mom to the person who actually did this." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't about to feel sorry for her. She wasn't the one who spent months in a cell, treated like a criminal. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but it didn't mean anything to me. Sorry doesn't give back the months I lost. Sorry doesn't erase the fact that she doubted me when I needed her most. Over the next few days, I tried to piece my life back together. The investigation had finally turned up undeniable proof that Rachel was behind everything. Text messages on her phone showed she'd been dealing drugs for months, maybe longer. She'd been using our house as a stash spot, hiding heroin under my bed so that if anything went wrong, I'd take the fall. The texts were damning. They showed her coordinating with a dealer, talking about moving product, even laughing about how Dad would never notice. I read every single message, my hands shaking with rage. How could my own daughter do this to me? What kind of person sets up their own father to save themselves? The police also found witnesses. People finally came forward who had seen Rachel sneaking around late at night, meeting sketchy people in parking lots and alleyways. One of her so-called friends admitted that Rachel had bragged about hiding drugs in my house. She thought it was the perfect cover. When the police finally issued a warrant for Rachel's arrest, I felt a mix of relief and bitterness. Relief that they were finally going after the real culprit, and bitterness that it took so long, that I had to pay the price for her actions. They found Rachel a few days after I got home. She was staying at a rundown apartment with a bunch of lowlifes. When the police searched the place, they found more drugs, along with scales, baggies, and cash. It was clear as day that she wasn't just using. She was fully involved in the drug trade. I thought seeing her arrested would bring some closure, but it didn't. It made me angrier. She didn't look scared. She didn't look ashamed. When they took her away, she just looked annoyed, like this was just an inconvenience she had to deal with. Catherine was devastated when she heard about the arrest. "She's still our daughter," she kept saying over and over like a broken record. "She's made mistakes, but she's still our baby." I couldn't take it anymore. "She's not my daughter!" I snapped at Catherine. "Not anymore. My daughter wouldn't do this to me. My daughter wouldn't destroy her family just to save her own skin." The legal process that followed was long, exhausting, and messy, like everything else Rachel left in her wake. She was charged with possession, intent to distribute, and most painfully for me, false accusations against her father. That charge hit like a gut punch every time I heard it in court. Knowing she deliberately orchestrated my arrest, gone out of her way to frame me, to watch me suffer, it made my blood boil. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The text between her and the dealer, witness statements, even her own carelessness when stashing drugs in her apartment painted a damning picture. But damning as it was, it didn't make things easier. Every court hearing, every delay, every smug look she gave when brought in for questioning chipped away at whatever pieces of humanity still clung to me. As part of the investigation, Rachel was required to take a drug test. Unsurprisingly, it came back positive, not just for heroin, but for several other substances, including cocaine and amphetamines. It was the final nail in the coffin. The daughter I once rocked to sleep, the little girl I taught to ride a bike, wasn't just a liar and manipulator. She was an addict and a criminal. Seeing the results didn't shock me, but it hurt. It's one thing to know in your gut that your child is on a destructive path. It's another thing entirely to see it spelled out in black and white. Part of me wanted to feel pity. I wanted to see her as a victim of her own choices. But that part was drowned out by overwhelming anger. My lawyer told me I didn't have to attend every hearing, but I couldn't stay away. I needed to see her face. I needed her to know I wasn't going to let her get away with this without seeing the damage she had caused. During the trial, her lawyer argued that Rachel's actions were the result of addiction. He said she wasn't in her right mind when she reported me to the police. I couldn't stay silent about this. As I sat there, I knew this wasn't a desperate mistake driven by addiction. This wasn't about weakness or bad judgment. It was intentional. She had never been a family person. She had never cared about anyone but herself. This wasn't about drugs. It was about revenge. She wanted to hurt me, to put me in trouble for kicking her out. That much was clear. I kept these thoughts to myself, though. The truth was already laid bare for everyone to see. There was no need for me to speak. Her actions spoke louder than anything I could say. The trial dragged on for months, delayed repeatedly by procedural nonsense, and Rachel's lawyer trying to reduce her charges. Meanwhile, I tried rebuilding the wreckage of my life. People in the neighborhood still whispered when I walked by. Some were still unsure whether I was truly innocent, despite all the evidence. Catherine seemed to exist in a constant state of denial. "She's sick," she kept saying, like it was a mantra that would make this easier to swallow. "She didn't mean it," she said one night after dinner. I snapped. "She didn't mean it? She knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't just using, she was dealing. She put my name on a police report. How the hell do you not mean that? We're her parents." Catherine's voice was trembling. "No matter what." "Not anymore," I said coldly, pushing back my chair and leaving the table. When the verdict finally came, it felt more like a formality than a victory. Rachel was found guilty on all charges: possession of narcotics, intent to distribute, filing false accusations. The judge didn't hold back. However, instead of prison, he sentenced her to serve 8 years in a long-term drug rehabilitation center. The judge believed that addressing her addiction was critical to ensuring she didn't repeat her actions. She showed little emotion as the sentence was read. She only gave a slight shrug as if to say, "It is what it is." I wanted to feel relief, but I didn't. The damage was already done. 8 years wouldn't erase the 5 months I spent in a cell. It wouldn't fix the relationships shattered or undo the stain on my reputation. If anything, her conviction felt like closing a chapter of a book I wish I had never started reading. After the trial, I got a restraining order against Rachel. I wanted to make sure she could never come near me again, even when she eventually got out. I didn't want her anywhere near my life. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. For a while, I couldn't sleep. I kept waking up in the middle of the night, haunted by everything that had happened. Catherine was a different story. She seemed stuck in the past. She started writing Rachel letters in the rehabilitation center, trying to keep some sort of relationship alive. At first, I didn't say anything, but eventually it became too much. "What are you hoping to accomplish?" I asked her one night when I caught her sealing another envelope. "She's our daughter," she said again, that same broken mantra that had been driving me crazy for months. "She stopped being our daughter the day she put me in cuffs," I replied, my voice cold and sharp. "I don't care what she's going through. I don't care if she gets better. She's out of my life. That's not changing." That conversation became the tipping point. We were no longer on the same page. We weren't even in the same book. Catherine clung to the idea of Rachel as the daughter we used to know, the little girl she'd raised, the baby she once held. But that version of Rachel didn't exist anymore. Not to me, maybe not to anyone. It became clear our marriage wouldn't survive this. The trust between us was gone, eroded by months of doubt, anger, and pain. Catherine had doubted me when I needed her most. Now she was trying to hold on to a relationship with the person who had destroyed everything we'd built. How could we come back from that? The answer was simple. We couldn't. One night, after another tense argument about Rachel, I finally said it out loud. "I don't think we can keep doing this." Catherine looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "You're saying you want to leave?" "I'm saying this isn't working." My voice was steady but heavy. "We're not the same people anymore. I don't trust you. You don't understand me. And honestly, I can't stay in this house surrounded by everything that reminds me of her. She nodded slowly, wiping her tears. I don't want this, but I understand. We agreed to separate a few weeks later. She kept the house, one place I didn't want anymore. I moved into a small apartment across town, far enough to feel like a fresh start, close enough to handle the practicalities of dividing our lives. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The worst part wasn't the physical separation. It was the realization that the life we'd built together had crumbled so completely. We had spent 2 decades as partners, raising a family, building a home, only for it to fall apart in the wake of our daughter's actions. Rachel's choices didn't just destroy my trust in her. They destroyed my marriage. The worst part of all this wasn't the jail time or the trial. It was the realization that the life I thought I had was never as strong as I believed. My marriage had been hanging by a thread, and I hadn't even realized it until it was too late. Maybe someday I'll find a way to let go of all this anger, but not today. Today, I just focus on putting one foot in front of the other, keeping Rachel as far away from me as possible. She made her choices. She'll live with the consequences, but so will I.